They were once the golden voices of R&B. Voices that carried our hopes, our desires, and the unspoken dreams of Black America in a world that rarely played fair. But what if I told you that the same artists who made you cry with a timeless love ballad died alone in rundown apartments, drunk, broken, and forgotten? That the woman you once adored, the one with the radiant smile and flowing hair, collapsed time and again on studio floors, her body weakened by white wine and sleeping pills? And she wasn't the only one. At least 20 legendary R&B artists bore a silent pain so deep, it could only escape through alcohol and tears. What you're about to see uncovers a heartbreaking chapter of music history. One that may forever change how you hear the songs you thought you knew. So brace yourself. And if their stories move you, leave a comment. Let them know they were seen, they were loved, and they are never forgotten. James Brown. James Brown, the godfather of soul, and the haunted man behind the beat. He wasn't just a musician, James Brown was a movement. The godfather of soul turned every drumbeat into a demand for dignity, every dance into a defiant cry for freedom. His voice electrified arenas, but his message resonated far beyond the stage. He didn't just change music, he stirred the soul of a nation. But behind the glittering spotlight stood a man shaped by shadows. Born into poverty, raised in chaos, and jailed as a teenager, James didn't simply grow up, he survived. Music was his escape, but alcohol, rage, and the need for control became his armor. And one September afternoon in 1988, it all cracked. Storming into an insurance office in Augusta, Georgia, James raged that someone had used his private bathroom. His bloodshot eyes blazed, his voice trembled with fury. No one dared get close. He had a loaded handgun in his pocket and a blood alcohol level off the charts. Moments later, he was in his truck, tearing down highways, crossing state lines, chased by police like a scene from a blockbuster. Only this was painfully real. When they finally caught him, he slammed his head against the squad car window, screaming incoherently. America watched in disbelief. There he was, the man who once roared "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." Now a mugshot, disheveled and broken, splashed across every TV screen. The fall from grace was brutal. But in truth, the world wasn't just watching a king tumble, they were witnessing a wounded child unravel. After the scandal, James quietly entered rehab. When he returned, his pompadour had grayed, and his moves were slower. But his voice, his soul, still carried fire. He didn't apologize for the headlines. He apologized for letting pain own him for so long. We celebrate those who shine, but abandon them when they dim. James Brown's story isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a plea for understanding. Because sometimes, the loudest cries come from those who never learned how to whisper their hurt. And true kindness? It begins when we choose to see the brokenness behind the brilliance, and forgive the pain people never had the words to explain. Joe Tex. Joe Tex, the screamer behind the curtain. Not long ago, I found myself at a disco where echoes of Joe Tex still lingered. Joe didn't sing, he screamed, he moaned, he begged his audience to feel every word. His voice wasn't smooth like others, it was raw, guttural, drenched in soul and funk, like each lyric was carved from pain. On stage, he was once James Brown's fiercest rival. But off stage, few saw the man slowly unraveling behind the music. In private, Joe Tex was one of the most fragile artists of his time. Alcohol became both his rocket fuel and his downfall. There's a story that still haunts Houston's music circles. 1963, Joe was set to open a big show. He arrived backstage trembling, not from nerves, but from the cold bite of the bottle. He sipped cheap white wine and whispered to his stage jacket on the wall, like it was a trusted friend. Crew members said he hurled a chair, convinced someone was following him. Then he stumbled on stage, missed the first note, and collapsed. The crowd froze. He burst into laughter, then shouted, "They're trying to kill me," before being carried off amid gasps and awkward silence. A year later, Joe dropped the track "You Better Get It," a fierce, unfiltered anthem that many believed was directed at himself. But the drinking didn't stop. Fellow performers recalled Joe cursing in a drunken haze 1 minute, then crying like a child the next. His eyes, they said, looked hollow, wounded, forever searching. The local paper once wrote, Joe Tex could leap off the stage to embrace his fans, but he could never leap free of his own shadow. At just 49, Joe died of a heart attack. Officially, it was health complications. But those closest to him believed it was a slow, quiet collapse, from alcohol, isolation, and grief no one dared name. After the funeral, one of his friends whispered, Joe didn't die because he stopped loving music. He died because he no longer remembered why he loved it in the first place. Joe Tex's life was a song, a heartbreaking one, that the world clapped for, then forgot. But if you've ever battled loneliness behind a smile, maybe you've hummed a verse of it too.
Johnny Taylor.
Johnny Taylor, the fallen angel in a white suit. Before the world knew him as the smooth-talking wizard of love songs, Johnny Taylor was a man of the cloth. His voice once soared through church rafters, full of gospel fire and the promise of salvation. But when he stepped into the spotlight of the entertainment industry, that sacred light began to flicker.
Fame found him fast. So did money.
Applause followed every note, but somewhere along the way, his soul began to fracture. Born into poverty, music was his escape, his lifeline from loneliness and struggle. But success didn't bring peace. It brought pressure. And to silence the whispers of guilt and disillusionment, he turned to alcohol. The same voice that once preached hope now echoed with regret, reminding him of the holiness he had left behind. Then came that night, July 1977, in a packed Chicago tea room. The crowd was buzzing, eager to hear the man behind the voice that once melted radios across America. But when he walked on stage, something was wrong. His hands trembled. His eyes looked distant, almost haunted. He chuckled nervously, missed his first lyric, and stumbled through the next. The band tried to guide him back, but he spun around and shouted at the mid-performance. Then, turning to the stunned crowd, he screamed that someone, was possessing him. He hurled the mic to the floor, cursed the silence, and stormed off the stage. The room fell into a hush so heavy, you could hear hearts breaking. For weeks, the music press ran wild with speculation. Some said he was high. Others whispered he was cursed. But a few fans saw the truth. It was a cry for help that no one answered. After that night, Johnny disappeared.
Months passed.
And when he returned, something in him had changed.
The white suit was gone. The big smile dimmed.
Even his legendary voice carried a new weight, like every note hurt to sing. In a rare interview he said quietly, "When you've stood before God, and the world still judges you, you drink until you can't feel anything." Johnny Taylor's story is a haunting reminder. Not everyone who wears white is an angel, and not everyone who believes in God knows how to forgive themselves. He wasn't broken because he was weak. He was broken because no one stayed when he needed them the most. So if you ever see someone spiraling, losing control in the face of pain, don't mock them. Maybe they were once a brilliant flame, and life just blew too hard. And if you ever feel yourself falling, remember, sometimes the way we save ourselves is by choosing to be kind to someone else. ZZ Hill, the man who missed his date with destiny. ZZ Hill didn't have the polished smile of a movie star. He didn't spin and slide across the stage like James Brown. And he wasn't wrapped in the holy glow of Sam Cooke. But when he opened his mouth, something raw and haunting poured out. A voice that sounded like it had cried through 100 sleepless nights. That voice brought the blues back home to the soul of Black America, especially in the Deep South. He became the voice of the forgotten, of the hurting, of the hearts too tired to hope. But the tragedy? He could heal others, yet never found a way to heal himself. Born into a struggling family in rural Texas, Hill knew from an early age, if he didn't sing, he'd be swallowed by silence and poverty. Music was his lifeline. But when fame finally found him, he clung to an old companion, alcohol. In 1981, backstage in Baton Rouge, he arrived with 2 bottles of wine. "I can't sing a note until I finish the second one," he told his assistant. The band looked at each other in panic, but nobody said a word. When ZZ stepped on stage, sweat already glistened on his face. The opening chords of Down Home Blues began, but something was off. His voice wavered. He forgot lyrics. He slowed the tempo. Then, in the middle of the performance, he sat down on the edge of the stage, singing not to the crowd, but as if to a ghost only he could see. The audience didn't know whether to clap or cry. The MC moved to cut the show short, but ZZ suddenly stood hand raised. "I'm sorry," he said into the mic, his voice shaking. I can't stand the sound of my own singing when I'm sober." Silence swept the room like a funeral. Some people turned their heads. Others wept openly. The next day, one local newspaper labeled him a disaster. But a smaller paper wrote something different. "He's not a failure. He's a man fighting his demons, and doing it in front of us." 2 years later, ZZ Hill was gone. Killed in a car crash. Rumor had it alcohol played a role. He died just as his star was rising again. His final album had become a bestseller. ZZ Hill wasn't just a blues singer. He was a man standing in the middle of the storm, holding a microphone like a confession. If you've ever missed your moment because you were lost in your own confusion, if you've ever turned down love because you couldn't love yourself, then you already know, ZZ Hill wasn't a tragedy. He was a reflection. And maybe the kindest thing we can do for someone who stumbles isn't to judge them, but to stay long enough to listen.
Syl Johnson.
Syl Johnson, the forgotten ghost of soul. They once called him the most forgotten man in soul music. Syl Johnson didn't wear the glitter of fame. He didn't have the push of a major label or the protection of industry giants. But one listen to Is It Because I'm Black and you'd feel it, the ache of a man who carried centuries of pain in every note. His voice wasn't smooth, it was raw, cracked and holy, like a blues prayer whispered in the back of a church where no one's listening. Syl had it all, the grit, the soul, the righteous rage of a man born into poverty and prejudice. But he lacked one thing, recognition. And that silence didn't just hurt him, it slowly destroyed him.
Bit by bit.
Through lonely nights, unanswered calls, and bottles that numbed more than they healed. One cold winter night in 1994, he was invited to perform at a memorial event in Chicago. He arrived late, wrapped in a worn wool coat, a cheap bottle of wine hidden in his pocket. When the host hesitated to say his name, it was clear, the young crowd didn't know who he was. When Syl stepped on stage, he looked out at the half-empty hall and said, "They used to call me the next Otis Redding. Do they even remember who Otis is now?" He sang different strokes to polite claps and confused smiles. Then he walked off stage, sat backstage alone, finished his wine, and wept. A witness said he didn't leave right away. He just sat there, quietly in the dark. No one dared to speak. The press never covered it. But those who were there whispered about it for years. They said Syl didn't die that night, but his spirit froze. When young producers came knocking later, offering him features and collaborations, he turned them down. He said, "I don't want to be remembered by people when I can't even remember who I am anymore." He faded from public view, living out the rest of his days in near silence. Few pictures. Fewer appearances. But after his death, something strange happened. Rappers, Kanye, Jay-Z, Wu-Tang, had sampled his songs for years, without credit, without permission. And suddenly, the world realized, Syl Johnson never vanished. We just never bothered to look. Syl's story is a cruel truth carved into the history of black music. Sometimes, the world has to bury you before it's ready to hear you. So if you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, like you're talking into the void, you're not alone. And if you see someone slipping into silence, don't ignore them. Sometimes, a simple acknowledgement can keep a soul from fading for good.
Ray Charles.
Ray Charles, the blind man who saw through the darkness. When people hear the name Ray Charles, they think of timeless hits like Hit the Road Jack or Georgia on My Mind, and that unforgettable silhouette, a man swaying at the piano, hidden behind dark sunglasses, lost in a sound only he could summon. He wasn't just a musician. He was the soul of American music, raw, real, and untouchable in his genius. But behind the applause, behind the women, the money and the fame, was a man carrying a quiet agony. Ray lost his sight at just 7 years old. Even more devastating, he watched helplessly as his younger brother drowned in front of him, unable to save him. That moment never left him. It lived in the shadows of his mind. And in those shadows, heroin and alcohol became his closest companions, the only ones that could hush the guilt that never had a name. In 1961, during a performance in New York, something was off. Backstage, a lighting tech saw Ray trying to strum a guitar, his hands shaking uncontrollably. On stage, he hit the wrong chord during the opening song, a mistake unheard of. His voice trembled, off-key, as if chasing a note only he could hear in the haze. The crowd clapped anyway, until a voice cut through the cheers, "He's drunk." No one argued.
It was the truth laid bare.
The next morning, a local newspaper wrote, "Ray Charles isn't singing for us anymore. He's singing to stop himself from falling apart." Ray was arrested more than once for drugs and alcohol. But time and again, he walked free, protected by his legend. In one interview, he offered a haunting truth. When you can't see the world, you build your own in your mind.
And the drugs?
They help you not get lost in it.
Some loved him. Some judged him.
But no one could deny, drunk or clean, shattered or standing, Ray Charles never lost the truth in his music. He passed away at 73, after years of illness. At his funeral, thousands came from every corner of the country. No one talked about the scandals. No one cared. They just played a song for you, and the tears came freely. Because Ray Charles wasn't just a man who lost his sight, he was a man who saw deeper than most ever will.
He was flawed. He was broken.
But he turned his pain into music, and in doing so, he gave the world something eternal. He reminded us that music isn't just sound, it's the cry of a soul too burdened to speak. And if we listen closely, not just with our ears, but with our hearts, we might just find a little more compassion for others, and for ourselves.
Sam Cooke.
Sam Cooke, the party angel who died in the dark.
He was more than a voice. He was a movement.
For a generation of Black Americans hungry for dignity and recognition, Sam Cooke was hope in human form. With a voice that could melt walls and a song, "A Change Is Gonna Come," that brought a nation to tears, he didn't just sing for himself. He sang for everyone who'd ever been silenced. But behind the smooth croon and polished suits was a man unraveling. Born into poverty and scarred by the early death of his alcoholic father, Sam never believed the world would play fair. So he escaped the pain with charm, with laughter, and with endless nights lost in music, liquor, and fleeting company. December 11, 1964. The night everything shattered. Sam checked into the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles with a young woman after an afternoon of heavy drinking and celebration. He was on the verge of launching a record label that would put power directly into black hands. But just hours later, the woman vanished with his wallet and clothes. Drunk and disoriented, Sam stumbled to the front office wearing nothing but a coat. There he confronted the motel manager, a frightened older woman. Words turned to shouts.
A struggle broke out. Then, a single gunshot. Sam Cooke fell dead. The music stopped.
The headlines came fast and brutal. Some painted him as a reckless womanizer, undone by his own vices. Others saw something more sinister. A setup, a silencing of a man who dared to dream too big in a world not ready for him. His death, to this day, splits opinion. Was it a drunken mistake?
A conspiracy?
Or simply a soul crushed by loneliness? What no one denies is this: when Sam Cooke died, American music lost something it never got back, its soul. He wasn't perfect.
He was human.
Flawed, brilliant, beautiful, broken. He sang for millions who had no voice, and in doing so, gave them one. If you've ever smiled to hide the pain, ever danced while grieving, or ever wanted more than the world was willing to give, you understand Sam Cooke. And maybe the lesson he leaves behind is this: be kind. Especially to the ones too lost, too drunk, too broken to love themselves.
Chuck Jackson.
Chuck Jackson, the man who sang pain no one wanted to hear. There was a time in the mid-60s when Chuck Jackson's voice could stop hearts. Smooth as silk, aching like a whispered goodbye, his signature hit "Any Day" now became a timeless anthem for those who loved in silence and lost in the dark. He wasn't just a singer, he was a soul bearing wounds through melody. But the world moved on, too fast, too loud.
And Chuck
didn't chase it. Born into an industry obsessed with headlines and profit, Chuck was the quiet storm.
No scandals. No chaos. Just raw talent.
And that's exactly what made him invisible. As the spotlight faded, he turned to the bottle, not to party, but to sleep, to forget, to remember who he once was. In 1987, he was invited to a Motown tribute show, a veteran of emotion returning to a stage that had long forgotten him. He arrived late, staggering slightly. A crew member remembered the moment. Chuck sat alone, mumbling lyrics to himself, eyes bloodshot, the air around him heavy with the smell of old pain and stronger liquor. When he stepped on stage, something broke. He stumbled through the chorus, lost the verses, and then simply stopped. He bowed his head, paused, then said softly, "I'm sorry.
I can't sing today.
I'm not sure who I'd be singing with anymore."
The room fell silent.
The cameras didn't roll again.
No headlines followed.
But for those in the audience, that moment never left them. His eyes told a story no record ever captured, one of a man haunted by memories no one asked him about. After that night, Chuck disappeared from the public eye. No more interviews.
No new albums. Just silence.
He lived quietly and passed just as quietly in 2023. The new generation may not know his name, but those whose hearts once broke to Any Day now still remember. Chuck Jackson didn't fade because he failed. He faded because the world stopped listening to sad songs. He didn't die from alcohol. He died from being forgotten. From no one ever asking, "Are you okay?" So if you ever meet someone like that, don't turn away. And if you ever hear yourself in the lyrics of a lonely song, do the kindest thing you can do: listen. Because sometimes, that's all a person needs to keep going.
Etta James.
Etta James, the devil who sang through fire and ashes. When Etta James sang at last, the world seemed to hold its breath. But behind that timeless voice was a life she once called a bloody battlefield. Born from a nameless affair and raised in the shadows of broken homes and brutal streets, Etta knew betrayal long before she ever understood love. Her voice carried the weight of every wound, every lie, every heartbreak. She didn't just sing, she survived through her songs, as if each note was an exorcism of the demons that chased her.
Beneath the spotlight, Etta wasn't a saint.
She was a fighter, brawling with others, wrestling with her past, and battling herself. Alcohol came as comfort, then caged her like a prisoner. In 1974, during a show in San Francisco, she stepped on stage with a dazzling smile, but those who looked closer saw the cracks. Backstage staff whispered that she downed half a bottle of whiskey before the curtain rose. The band struck the first notes, but Etta didn't sing. Instead, she kicked off her high heels, sat on the edge of the stage, and spoke of a lover who walked out, saying, "You loved the bottle more than you ever loved me." Then, with no warning, she screamed the first line of "I'd Rather Go Blind," her voice rough and raw like shattered glass.
The crowd froze. Some wept.
Others walked out. The next day, headlines dubbed it a diva's breakdown, an unraveling act soaked in liquor and grief.
After that night, Etta vanished.
Whispers swirled: rehab, a suicide attempt, rock bottom. But months later, she returned, unapologetic and unbroken.
"I'm still alive," she said.
"And as long as I'm breathing, I'll sing like it's the last time."
And she did.
Etta James sang with a sorrow so deep it bled into every lyric, but never stained her music. Her voice held fury, longing, survival. She didn't beg for love, she dared it to love her right. And if you've ever cried for a memory no one else understands, then you felt her soul brush against yours. So be kind to the ones who smile through silent storms. Because some voices, like Etta's, aren't just singing. They're screaming not to be forgotten.
Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye, a voice that sang through suffering. Marvin Gaye wasn't just a singer, he was a soul crying out in a private hell. He didn't perform with polished technique. He performed with a broken heart. What's Going On felt like a desperate prayer. Let's Get It On was less seduction, more gentle longing. Sexual Healing sounded like a man pleading to rescue himself from drowning. Behind that smooth voice and iconic smile was a man trapped in a life tangled with love, addiction, and inner torment. Raised in a strict, abusive household, Marvin lived in fear from the time he could walk. His father's belt carved silence into his childhood. Music became his only escape. Alcohol became his only relief. And in the end, both were not enough to save him. One night in 1983, Marvin attended a backstage gathering in Los Angeles. He'd been drinking for hours. His face was pale, his eyes distant, like he was staring into something no one else could see. A fan approached him, smiling, asking for an autograph. Marvin looked at her for a long moment and softly said, "If you knew I died when I was 12, would you still want one?"
No one knew what he meant.
Hours later, after a heated argument with his closest friend, fueled by paranoia and pain, Marvin stormed out, vanishing into the night. He nearly drove off a cliff that evening. The headlines read, "Marvin Gaye loses control," but they missed the truth: he was already lost long before. Hiding from the public, from his parents, and from himself, he lived his final days in fear. A year later, the unthinkable happened. On the eve of his 45th birthday, Marvin was shot and killed by his own father. The same man who'd once beaten the music into him now silenced it forever. His father later said he simply couldn't take Marvin's chaos anymore. The news stunned the nation. Fans wept. Radios fell silent. And yet, even then, few truly understood the depth of Marvin's pain. Some say his demons killed him. Others say his father did. But what's undeniable is this: Marvin Gaye was one of the most fragile souls to ever touch a microphone. He didn't hide his wounds. He sang them. He wept in the open. He loved like it was his final chance. And if you've ever felt like the world didn't understand you, if you've ever been surrounded by love and still felt alone, then you understand him too.
So please be kind.
Because you never know what battles someone else is fighting. And if you can, forgive, even if the person who hurt you is yourself. Music might not always save us, but compassion can. If you're still here, still listening, thank you. Not everyone has the strength to look this deeply into another's sorrow. 10 names have passed, each carrying tragedy like a shadow. But before we judge their downfall, maybe we should ask, were they broken? Or were we just too blind to see their pain? Let us know what you feel, because your voice too is part of the story.
Solomon Burke.
Solomon Burke, the soul king with an appetite the world never understood. He wasn't just a singer.
He was a force.
A gospel preacher in a velvet suit, a giant in both stature and sound, the man who bridged gospel, R&B, and rock with a voice that could lift a church and break a heart in the same breath. To many, Solomon Burke was royalty, the king of soul. But behind the crown was a man battling demons no spotlight could hide. What the world rarely saw was the aching loneliness beneath the grandeur. Solomon's throne wasn't just built on talent, it was padded with indulgence, sorrow, and a hunger that food and fame could never satisfy. One night in the late 1980s, New Orleans bore witness to the unraveling. He arrived nearly an hour late, drenched in sweat before the first note. Fans expected magic, but what they saw was a legend struggling to breathe, sitting through his set after consuming a feast of fried chicken, cornbread, cream pies, and half a bottle of liquor backstage. At first, the crowd roared. But when he forgot lyrics, drifted off key, and stopped mid-song just to wipe his face, the cheers turned to uneasy whispers. Still, he ended with a haunting laugh. "I've sung for others my whole life. Tonight, I'm singing for myself, and I can't remember the words." The tabloids pounced, once again making him a symbol of excess and lost glory. But in a later interview, Burke quietly confessed, "I never learned to love myself completely. Only when I had food and wine by my side did I feel whole." Solomon Burke's story is a reminder. Even kings can feel empty. Even icons need tenderness. He didn't fall because he lacked greatness, but because the world never showed him how to be soft without shame. So next time you see someone who seems to have it all, remember, they might be the ones most in need of love.
Percy Sledge.
Percy Sledge. When a man breaks on stage, not just in song. Percy Sledge could stop time with a single note. When a man loves a woman. That wasn't just a love song. It was a soul cry. It echoed the heartbreak of countless black men who loved in silence, endured loss without tears, and carried burdens too heavy to name. But behind that iconic voice was a man drowning in his own sorrow. Born into poverty in rural Alabama, Percy worked as a hospital orderly before a chance encounter with a producer changed everything. Overnight, he became a star. But fame came too fast, and compassion faded even faster. He struggled to cope with the pressure, and the bottle became his only comfort. In 1982, at a small venue in Mississippi, Percy took the stage with a flushed face and a voice worn thin. He sang just the first line, then sat down mid-song, covered his face and wept. The crowd thought it was part of the act, until the crying didn't stop. "I don't deserve that song," a sound technician recalled him whispering through tears. Then softly, he called out the name of a woman no one recognized. The show was cancelled. The next morning, headlines called it the emotional collapse of an aging star. But for the people in the room that night, it was something else. They didn't see a drunk. They saw a man whose pain no longer fit inside his body, only in his voice. Percy kept performing for decades, even as the bottle stayed close. He wasn't perfect, but he was honest. And sometimes, kindness isn't just forgiving others, it's forgiving yourself for breaking under the weight of your own truth. Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett, the midnight beast who refused to be silenced. They called him Mr. Midnight Hour, but Wilson Pickett was no smooth crooner, he was fire on vinyl. He didn't sing songs, he attacked them. He screamed into the mic like it owed him a lifetime, fought the rhythm like it was a demon trying to take him under. His voice wasn't polished, it was a war cry, untamed and electric, roaring straight from the depths of a soul that had known too much pain. Behind that raw power was a man still wrestling with the ghosts of his past. Born into crushing poverty and beaten by his father, Wilson grew up in a world that taught him life was a fight. Rage became his fuel. Music became his weapon. And the stage, the only place where he was finally in control. But off stage, the darkness never left him. In 1991, Pickett was arrested after plowing his car into a neighbor's house in New Jersey. He was drunk, disoriented, and shouting that someone was chasing him. Witnesses say he screamed, "They won't let me sleep. They know I'm about to write the biggest hit of my life, right here in the police station." The media turned it into a circus, one of Motown's greats, reduced to a punchline. But to those who truly knew him, Pickett wasn't crazy. He was haunted. Haunted by a world that had tried to silence him since he was a child. A world that told him to sit down, shut up, calm down, and he refused. Every scream from his lips was a battle cry for the unheard. Behind the alcohol, the arrests, and the wild headlines was a man simply trying to claw back the control life had stolen from him. So the next time you hear that scream in the midnight hour, don't laugh. Don't judge. Just remember, some people scream not because they're loud, but because the silence nearly killed them. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway, the genius trapped in a storm. He wasn't just a singer. He was a fragile soul wrapped in velvet sound, a quiet ache stitched into every note. His voice felt like a lullaby for the brokenhearted, his lyrics a cry for those who suffer in silence. But behind A Song for You and the haunting hope of someday we'll all be free was a man battling demons no one could see. Donny suffered from schizophrenia. The voices in his head weren't poetic, they were tormenting. They turned his brilliance into isolation, made him question even the people who loved him most. His only escape? Alcohol, just to silence the noise for a while. In 1979, during what would be his final recording session, Donnie walked into a New York studio with a vacant stare. A fellow musician later said, he just stood there, eyes closed, mumbling, not singing. When they asked what was wrong, Donnie screamed, "They're watching me. The microphone is tapped." Moments later, barefoot and wearing only a robe, he fled the studio in panic. Hours later, his body was found beneath the 15th floor of the Essex House Hotel.
Police called it suicide.
The music world was devastated, but not shocked. Because in every song, Donnie had already been crying for help.
We just didn't listen.
After his death, "Someday We'll All Be Free" became more than a song. It became a prophecy. It was as if Donnie had known, peace might only come when the noise finally stopped. Donnie Hathaway wasn't crazy. He was simply too tender for a world that never stopped screaming. And if you've ever been tired of pretending to be strong, if you've ever felt the weight of invisible pain, then maybe, just maybe, you understand him too. Sometimes, the greatest act of kindness isn't fixing someone. It's sitting with them in silence, when words fail, and just letting them know they're not alone.
Billy Preston.
Billy Preston, the fifth shadow of the Beatles. They called him the fifth Beatle, the only black man to record with the legendary British band, leaving his fingerprints on timeless hits like Get Back and Something. Billy Preston's fingers danced across keyboards like they were born to sing. But behind that brilliance was a boy carrying a wound the world never saw. He was raised in a home of hidden pain, scarred by abuse no child should endure. The trauma followed him like a shadow, and healing never came. Alcohol stepped in as a friend, then stayed as his captor. In 1992, at a small theater in Los Angeles, fans came expecting magic. What they witnessed was heartbreak. Billy stumbled through songs, his eyes red, his voice heavy, his hands hitting wrong notes. Then, in the middle of a performance, he stood up, slammed the keyboard and cried out, "I can't hear the music anymore." After the show, someone found him asleep behind the theater, curled up next to a trash can, still holding his keyboard. Whispers grew louder, another genius ruined by addiction. But those who knew him understood, he was still running from a past he never spoke of publicly, years of sexual abuse by a church elder when he was a teenager.
A truth too painful for the spotlight.
Billy Preston's story is more than a cautionary tale. It's a tragic reminder that not all gifted souls are blessed with peace. And maybe the most human thing we can do isn't to judge someone who's lost their way, but to ask, do you need someone to listen?
Marvin Cease.
Marvin Cease, the drunken preacher of pain and passion. He may have never topped the mainstream charts, but in the Deep South's black communities, Marvin Cease was a legend whispered through jukeboxes and juke joints. His songs, raw, erotic and aching, like candy liquor, weren't just scandalous, they were confessions. Confessions from a man who bared his scars as boldly as he sang about desire. Raised in poverty, abandoned by comfort, Marvin didn't perform, he poured. The stage became his church, his therapist, his battlefield. And sometimes, his bottle was the only choir he needed. At a 1999 concert in Jackson, Mississippi, controversy exploded. Marvin staggered on stage, wine in hand, singing between sips. The crowd jeered.
He didn't flinch.
"I sing for real and drink for real," he snapped, before hurling the mic to the ground, dropping to his knees, and crying out a woman's name, then picked the mic back up and kept singing like the pain had possessed him.
The press called it chaos.
Fans called it truth. Critics saw a drunk. His people saw a man unraveling. Because if you came up from nothing, you understood, Marvin didn't drink to party, he drank to survive. He showed us that sometimes, what we label offensive, is actually a soul begging not to be forgotten. And in a world quick to shame, the kindest act is not to judge, but to understand that no one chooses their wounds.
Johnny Watson.
Johnny Guitar Watson, the devil laughed through his strings. Johnny Guitar Watson didn't just play the blues, he electrified it. With a guitar that roared like thunder and a swagger that dared death itself, he fused blues, funk, and raw attitude into something the world had never seen. But behind the fire of his sound was a man consumed by demons, strong liquor, fast women, and a lifelong rebellion that never cooled. In 1995, during a concert in Japan, something eerie happened. Right in the middle of a fiery solo, Johnny paused, looked up toward the heavens, and chuckled. Then he said to the crowd, "I just saw my father."
The room fell silent.
"I'm going to die after this song," he added. The audience laughed nervously, thinking it was part of the show. But as the final chord rang out, Johnny collapsed, still clutching his guitar, as if trying to play his way into the afterlife. He survived that night, but whispers spread like wildfire. Some claimed he was drunk. Others swore he'd been possessed. But the most chilling theory? That he'd seen the ghost of the father who once beat him as a boy. Johnny never confirmed or denied it. He just smiled and said, "If I die playing the guitar, that's the way I want to go." Johnny never asked for sympathy. He lived loud, and if you listened close, you could hear the pain hiding beneath the rhythm. So next time you see someone laughing too hard, too long, look again. They might be covering a cry the world was never meant to hear. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is simply stop laughing when someone else is shaking.
Bobby Womack.
Bobby Womack, the man who betrayed his own soul. Once hailed as the heartbeat of 70s R&B, Bobby Womack was a master of sound and sorrow. He wrote timeless songs, played guitar with fire, and sang like every lyric was carved from his wounds. But behind the brilliance was a life drowning in pain. After the tragic death of his mentor and close friend Sam Cooke, Bobby shocked the world by marrying Cooke's widow just months later. That decision shattered his reputation. The black music community turned its back on him. He was branded a traitor. And so, Bobby sought comfort not in forgiveness, but in alcohol and drugs. By 1985, his demons had become impossible to hide. During a performance in Detroit, Bobby stumbled on stage, dazed and mumbling. As boos erupted from the crowd, he hurled the microphone and shouted, "You only love my voice, nobody loves me." Later that night, a friend found him alone in his hotel room, drunk and broken, listening to his own cassette on repeat, sobbing like a child. Most remember him for the scandals, the heartbreak, the career that unraveled. But for anyone who's ever lived with regret, with shame, or felt unheard in a room full of applause, Bobby's story is more than just tragedy. It's a mirror. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest kindness we can offer is simply to hear the pain people don't know how to say out loud.
Teddy Pendergrass.
Teddy Pendergrass, the man whose world broke in half at the height of his fame. He wasn't just an R&B singer, he was the sex symbol of soul. With a voice that melted hearts and shows so sensual they were reserved for women only, Teddy sang not just to women, but for them. But behind that velvet voice and smoldering gaze was a man quietly haunted by pain. He masked it with alcohol, until one night in 1982 changed everything. Driving through Philadelphia, Teddy lost control of his Rolls-Royce and crashed. He survived, but barely. The crash left him paralyzed from the chest down. And when news broke that his passenger was a transgender woman, the headlines exploded with scandal.
For some, he became a punchline. For others, a fallen idol. But Teddy didn't let tragedy define him. He returned, in a wheelchair, yes, but with the same fire in his voice. He performed like a man who had lost nothing, and in doing so, reminded the world he had lost nothing that truly mattered. He forgave himself. He embraced the man he became. And maybe, just maybe, that's something we all need to learn. How to be kind to the version of ourselves that didn't turn out perfect. Because healing doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes, it looks like sitting in a chair and still singing your truth. Betty Wright.
Betty Wright, the diva who wiped her tears with bitter wine. She was the voice of resilience, the anthem of every heartbroken black woman who refused to stay down. Her hit Clean Up Woman wasn't just a song, it was a survival manual wrapped in soul. But behind that powerhouse voice was a woman quietly drowning in her own pain. Betty endured heartbreak after heartbreak. Her career faded, love betrayed her, and the unimaginable happened. She lost her son to gun violence. That grief never left her. One night in Miami, after a small club gig, she didn't return to her hotel. Instead, she sat in her car alone, sipping wine and crying softly into the dark. A backstage staffer later recalled her whispering, "I sing to live. But sometimes I just want to be silent." There were no headlines. No breaking news. Just a few quiet witnesses who saw the truth in her eyes, strong but tired. Fierce but fragile. Betty Wright never let the world see her fall apart. But if you really listen to her songs, not just the melody, but the spaces in between, you could hear it, the quiet cry for help. And maybe the most powerful thing we can ever do is to hear someone when no one else is listening.
Gil Scott-Heron.
Gil Scott-Heron, the prophet who died thirsty from his own warning. Gil Scott-Heron wasn't just a musician, he was a prophet with a microphone. A voice that rose from the fire of Black America's struggle, echoing through the 1970s with a haunting battle cry, "The revolution will not be televised."
He didn't just sing, he awakened.
His words cracked through complacency and demanded justice. But while he urged the world to wake up, Gil himself was slipping into a long silent night. Born into poverty, raised in segregation, and abandoned by his father, Gil wrote with the wisdom of an old soul and the fury of a man who had seen too much. But behind the brilliance was a broken spirit, one that alcohol and crack cocaine slowly eroded for nearly 30 years. The same voice that rallied millions became a whisper in the darkness. In 2001, he was arrested at an airport with drugs in his bag. When he stood before the judge, he refused legal counsel and simply said, "I know I was wrong. But you were wrong long before me." That night in his jail cell, a guard remembered Gil murmuring poetry into the silence, his voice cracking midline, as if he were trying to stitch his soul back together with the only thing he had left, his words.
Was he a genius? A cautionary tale? The world couldn't decide. But those who listened, really listened, knew the truth. Gil Scott-Heron was a candle in the dark, bright, beautiful, and burning out too fast. He didn't ask us to be perfect. He asked us to be honest. To stop pretending we're okay when we're not. And to understand that strength isn't in hiding your pain, it's in sharing it. If you've ever felt unheard, remember this: understanding doesn't begin with excuses. It begins with empathy. With compassion, for others, and for yourself. These R&B artists didn't just sing for fame, they sang for connection. For healing.
For someone to simply understand. So before you judge their fall, take a moment to witness their rise. That's where the beauty is. That's where the humanity lives. Thank you for walking with us through this emotional journey. If any of these stories touched your heart or sparked a memory, please like, share, and comment the name of the artist who moved you most. Because sometimes, it's your words that keep theirs alive. What if I told you that behind the smooth rhythms and soulful melodies of reggae lies a darker truth? Stories of addiction that nearly destroyed some of the genre's greatest legends. From Dennis Brown, who was often spotted backstage battling demons few could see, to Gregory Isaacs, who openly confessed that his addiction shattered friendships, tore through his family, and almost ended his career. These are the 15 most heartbreaking substance struggles in reggae music history. Prepare to see the icons like you've never seen them before. Johnny Ringo. Johnny Ringo was a vibrant force in Jamaica's reggae and dancehall scene, lighting up the airwaves from the late 1970s through the early 1990s. His musical journey began humbly in a Kingston record shop, where fate introduced him to fellow artist Welton Irie. The two forged a strong creative bond, collaborating for years before ever stepping into a recording booth. Before fame, Ringo sharpened his skills as an operator for renowned sound systems like Soul Express and Rattone, immersing himself in the heart of Jamaica's sound culture. His big break came in the late 70s with the release of his debut single Trouble, Never Set Like Rain. It didn't take long for Ringo's playful, often provocative lyrics to capture the attention of listeners across the island. Tracks like Two Lesbians and Push Lady Push stirred buzz, but it was his 1982 smash Dub and Left that propelled him to international recognition. He followed up with local favorites such as Pain a Back, Nah Fight Over Woman, and Married for the Opportunity. That same year, he made waves again by contributing the opening track Toyin' to Yellowman's iconic album Superstar Yellowman Has Arrived, solidifying his place in the dancehall canon. Despite his studio success, Ringo never abandoned his roots. He remained active in the sound system circuit, performing with crews like Lee's Unlimited and Ray Symbolic Hi-Fi, often alongside Squidlay Ranking and longtime partner Welton Irie. Their performances carried the raw energy of Jamaican dancehall music to international stages, helping the genre reach new audiences worldwide. In the early 80s, Ringo was part of some of the first live dancehall album recordings, an innovative step that captured the scene's electrifying spirit. But by the early 90s, he gradually faded from the recording spotlight. Sadly, in his later years, Ringo struggled with addiction. After a difficult battle with crack cocaine, he passed away in July 2005. Johnny Ringo's story is one of talent, trailblazing, and tragedy, a reminder of the highs and lows that often shape the lives of cultural pioneers.
Bob Marley.
Bob Marley wasn't just a Jamaican singer, songwriter, and guitarist. He was a revolutionary force who redefined music and culture. As one of the pioneers of reggae, he blended reggae, ska, and rocksteady into a sound so distinct, it echoed across the globe and made him a symbol of unity, resistance, and soul. But beyond the music, there was another part of Marley's life that became almost as iconic: his deep, unwavering connection to cannabis. For Marley, smoking herb wasn't just a habit, it was a way of life. By the 1970s, marijuana had become a constant companion. Some say he smoked up to 18 joints a day, lighting up morning, noon, and night. But it wasn't about getting high for the sake of it. It was sacred. After converting from Catholicism to Rastafarianism in 1966, Marley embraced the belief that ganja was a divine gift, a holy sacrament that connected him to Jah, God, deepened meditation, and unlocked spiritual truth. Even when he was arrested in 1968 for possession, Marley never renounced his beliefs. He saw cannabis not as a vice, but as a mirror to the soul, a tool for awakening. As he once put it, when you smoke the herb, it reveals you to yourself. All the wickedness you do, the herb reveals it to you. Your conscience becomes clear because herb makes you meditate. It's only a natural thing, it grows like a tree. Despite his heavy use, Bob Marley was known for his strong moral compass. He used his voice not to glorify fame but to fight injustice, spread love, and call for peace. Through his music, his message, and yes, even his smoke, he inspired millions to look inward, stand up, and believe in something greater than themselves.
Dennis Brown.
Dennis Brown, often hailed as the crown prince of reggae, rose from a young prodigy into one of Jamaica's most beloved musical icons. Known especially for his soulful contributions to lovers rock, a romantic and smooth style of reggae, Brown's journey began remarkably early. He was just 11 years old when he first stepped into a recording booth in the late 1960s. His debut track, Lips of Wine, recorded with producer Derek Harriott, was never released. But fate had bigger plans. Soon after, Brown began working with the legendary Clement Coxsone Dodd at the iconic Studio One label. It was there, at the tender age of 12, that he recorded No Man is an Island, a track that slowly caught fire and by the end of 1969, became a nationwide anthem in Jamaica. By 1972, Dennis was making waves beyond the island. That year, he recorded an album with producer Joe Gibbs, and one standout track, Money in My Pocket, became a fan favorite in the UK and a staple in his electrifying live performances. Brown's hits kept coming: Cassandra, No More Will I Roam, and Africa. Songs that not only showcased his velvet voice but also reflected his deep-rooted Rastafarian faith. Yet behind the smooth rhythms and bright spotlight, a darker struggle loomed. Dennis quietly battled substance addiction, particularly crack cocaine. Though he often downplayed the issue, insisting it hadn't taken over his life, those close to him, like DJ Ranking Joe, knew the toll it was taking. By the late 1990s, his health had deteriorated. Years of drug use had ravaged his body. While on tour in Brazil in May 1999, he fell gravely ill and was diagnosed with pneumonia. He returned to Jamaica to recover, but on June 30th, his condition worsened. After suffering cardiac arrest, Dennis Brown was rushed to the University Hospital of the West Indies in Kingston. The next day, reggae lost one of its brightest lights. Gregory Isaacs. Gregory Isaacs was more than just a reggae singer. He was a legend with a voice so smooth and soulful, fans around the world knew him as the Cool Ruler. His career began in 1968 under the name Winston Sinclair, and he quickly made waves when he partnered with fellow artist Errol Dunley to launch the African Museum record label and shop. It was a bold move, but it paid off in a big way with the release of My Only Lover, a track often hailed as the first true lovers rock reggae song. From there, Isaacs delivered hit after hit, weaving romance and roots into unforgettable classics like All I Have Is Love, Lonely Soldier, Black A Kill Black, Extra Classic, and Loving Pauper. By the late 1970s, he stood tall among reggae royalty, sharing the spotlight with icons like Dennis Brown and Bob Marley. In the early 80s, Isaacs signed with Island Records, a major label that brought reggae to international stages. His defining moment came in 1982 with the release of Night Nurse. Though it didn't top the charts, the song became a club favorite and earned massive radio play. The album climbed to number 32 in the UK, and Night Nurse became so iconic it was even used in commercials for cold medicine. But just as Gregory Isaacs was reaching the height of global fame, his personal life spiraled out of control. In 1982, he was arrested for possession of unlicensed firearms and sentenced to 6 months in a Kingston prison. He claimed the guns were for protection, but shockingly, it was his 27th arrest. Behind the music, a darker struggle loomed. Addiction gripped him, dragging him into dangerous territory and toxic dependencies. Crack cocaine began to erode not only his body, but the very voice that made him famous. By 2007, he'd lost most of his teeth. His wife, June Isaacs, later opened up about how the addiction left him paranoid, unstable, and deeply insecure. In a heartbreaking 1988 interview, Isaacs himself confessed that drugs had wrecked his friendships, strained his family, and nearly destroyed his career. Sadly, his health never recovered. After a long and painful battle with lung cancer, Gregory Isaacs passed away in 2010. His voice may be gone, but his music, and the heartbreak behind it, still echoes through the soul of reggae.
Tyrone Taylor.
Tyrone Taylor was a reggae artist gifted with a voice that melted hearts, smooth, soulful, and unforgettable. He launched his career working alongside some of Jamaica's most legendary producers, including the famed Winston "Niney" Holness, also known as The Observer. Together, they crafted 2 local hits, Just a Feeling and Sufferation. But it wasn't until 1983 that Taylor broke into international fame with the song that would forever define his legacy, Cottage in Negril.
The track was a phenomenon. Cottage in Negril resonated deeply with listeners and soared up the charts, earning Taylor the title of Jamaica's best-selling singer of 1983. Major label MCA took notice and signed him, hoping to recreate that magic. They released Pledge to the Sun, aiming for another hit. But the album flopped. With lukewarm sales and waning interest, MCA pulled back support. Taylor was sent on a European tour with little promotion, feeling discarded by the very industry that once celebrated him. Disillusioned and alone, Taylor walked away from the contract, and slowly from the spotlight. In the shadows of fame, a darker chapter unfolded. Addiction began to consume him. By the late 1980s, he was recording sporadically, though he had a brief resurgence in 1987 with Members Only and Be For Real. In 1994, he teamed up with producer Clive Hunt to release the bittersweet Rainy Sunset, a track that hinted at the brilliance he still carried. But behind the music, his personal battles only worsened. Years of addiction and alcoholism ravaged his life. Eventually, Tyrone Taylor became homeless, spending nearly 2 decades on the unforgiving streets of Los Angeles' Skid Row. In 2007, after suffering 2 debilitating strokes that left him confined to a wheelchair, he passed away from complications related to prostate cancer. Tyrone Taylor's story is one of stunning talent, fleeting glory and heartbreaking decline. A powerful voice that once lifted souls, ultimately silenced by pain and neglect. Majek Fashek. Majek Fashek was more than just a reggae artist. He was a voice of spirit, struggle, and strength. Born in Nigeria, his journey into music began in the early 1980s under the stage name Rajesh Khanal. He joined the reggae band Jastics, alongside Amos McCroy Gregg and Black Rice, and together they became the heartbeat of Music Panorama on NTA Benin. But it wasn't until the group disbanded that Majek stepped into his true power. Rebranding himself as Majek Fashek, he signed with Tabansi Records and released his solo debut, Prisoner of Conscience, in 1988. The album featured the hauntingly beautiful Send Down the Rain. A track so powerful, it became legend. Released during a devastating drought, the rains returned soon after. Many believed Majek had mystical powers. That year, he swept 6 major music awards, including Song of the Year and Reggae Artist of the Year. His sound soon reached beyond Africa. In 1992, Majek brought his fiery spirit to American audiences, performing on Late Night with David Letterman, a historic moment for any African musician. But behind the fame and accolades, a darker battle was raging. Substance abuse and alcoholism slowly consumed him. By 2015, the once celebrated star had lost everything. Fans were heartbroken to see him wandering the streets of Lagos, frail, disoriented, and a shadow of his former self. His former backup singer, Monica Amoraro, even launched a GoFundMe campaign to help get him off the streets and into rehab. As if addiction wasn't enough, Majek also battled severe health issues. On June 1, 2020, he passed away in his sleep in New York City at the age of 57. The cause? Esophageal cancer. His death marked the end of a legendary, turbulent, and deeply spiritual journey. But Majek Fashek's voice still echoes, through every lyric, every beat, and every soul his music ever touched. Buju Banton isn't just a reggae and dancehall legend, he's a force of nature in Jamaican music history. His journey began in the late 1980s, dropping dancehall singles that turned heads, but it was 1992 that truly changed everything. That year, he released Stamina Daddy and Mr. Mention, the latter becoming the best-selling album in Jamaican history at the time, shattering records previously held by none other than Bob Marley and the Wailers. His meteoric rise caught the eye of Mercury Records, and in 1993, he released Voice of Jamaica under their label, solidifying his global appeal. But Buju's story took a sharp turn in 2009. He was arrested in the US on serious drug trafficking charges. His first trial ended with a hung jury, but in 2011, he was convicted based on audio and video surveillance from an informant, footage that allegedly showed him sampling the substance in a Florida warehouse. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Even behind bars, Buju's voice echoed loud and clear. His 2010 album Before the Dawn won a Grammy for Best Reggae Album, proving his artistry couldn't be silenced. In December 2018, after serving 7 years, Buju walked free, and he didn't miss a beat. He launched his triumphant Long Walk to Freedom tour in 2019, beginning with a massive homecoming concert at Kingston's National Stadium that drew over 30,000 passionate fans. Since then, he's released new music, including the hit Country for Sale, which soared to the top of the iTunes reggae chart. If you're enjoying this video, show some love with a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button and join the journey. Lee Scratch Perry wasn't just a producer. He was a sonic sorcerer, a mad genius who reshaped the very soul of reggae music.
Born in Jamaica, Perry rose from humble beginnings in the late 1950s, selling records for Clement Coxsone Dodd's legendary sound system. But Perry didn't want to spin hits, he wanted to create them. By the 1970s, he had built his own backyard studio, the now mythic Black Ark, where he wielded total creative control and transformed the art of music production forever. Perry was one of the earliest pioneers of dub music, taking reggae tracks and stripping them down, reimagining them with echo, reverb, and wild sound effects. His productions were not just recordings, they were experiences. He worked with icons like Bob Marley and the Wailers, Max Romeo, the Congos and Junior Mavin, carving out a sound that was raw, otherworldly and deeply spiritual. But Perry was more than just innovative, he was eccentric to the core. He believed music had spiritual energy, and his studio sessions were often filled with bizarre rituals, blowing weed smoke into microphones, hammering the ground mid-recording, speaking in tongues, even walking backward through the streets of Kingston. And in a move that stunned the music world, Perry one day set fire to his beloved Black Ark studio, claiming it had been overtaken by evil spirits and could only be cleansed by flames. After years in the shadows, his brilliance re-emerged in the late 80s, teaming up with British producers like Adrian Sherwood and Mad Professor. With a newfound clarity, he gave up drinking and smoking. Perry declared his power came not from substances, but from within. The world finally caught up to his genius. In 2003, he won a Grammy for Best Reggae Album. A year later, Rolling Stone honored him as one of the 100 greatest artists of all time. Lee Perry didn't just make music. He conjured it from the air, fire and spirit, and left behind a legacy that still echoes through every bass line and beat. George Nooks. George Nooks, the Jamaican reggae and gospel sensation, began his musical journey in the church, where his voice first rose from the youth choir. From school concerts to local talent shows, it was clear early on. This young singer had something special. His big break came when he teamed up with legendary producer Joe Gibbs, contributing to reggae classics like Dennis Brown's 1978 hits Money in My Pocket and How Could I Leave. Though his fame dipped in the 1980s, Nooks staged an impressive comeback in the 90s. His 1996 single Real Man climbed to No. 55 on the Billboard R&B single sales chart, and his 1997 self-titled album swept 3 Tama Reggae Music Awards. For a while, it seemed George Nooks was unstoppable. His 2016 album Ride Out Your Storm became a commercial hit, reaching No. 4 on the Billboard Reggae Albums chart and No.
22 on the Gospel chart.
But as his music soared, legal clouds began to gather. In May 2017, Nooks was arrested in St. Andrew, Jamaica, after police allegedly found a small bag of illegal substances in his Mercedes-Benz SUV. He was charged with possession, granted an $80,000 bail, and faced trial 2 years later. But due to conflicting evidence, he was found not guilty. Just weeks before that verdict, in April 2019, Nooks was arrested again. This time accused of discarding a capsule filled with a suspicious white substance during a police raid. He was held overnight at Kingston Public Hospital but released without charge. His lawyer, the prominent Tom Tavares Finson, threatened to sue for false imprisonment.
Still, the saga wasn't over.
In October 2020, after a review by the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nooks was re-arrested. Now he faced more serious charges, illegal drug possession and attempting to pervert the course of justice, allegedly for swallowing a substance while in custody. He pleaded not guilty, was released on $300,000 bail, and has since watched his trial delayed multiple times. From choirboy to chart topper to courtroom, George Nooks' story is a roller coaster of redemption, rhythm and controversy, and it's far from over.
Peter Tosh.
Peter Tosh wasn't just a reggae musician, he was a revolutionary spirit. As one of the founding members of the Wailers, alongside Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer, Tosh helped shape the sound of Jamaican music. But when he left the group, he didn't fade into the background. Instead, he blazed his own fearless path. In 1976, Tosh released his solo debut Legalize It, a bold anthem that became the voice of cannabis culture and a battle cry for personal freedom. But for Tosh, it wasn't just a song, it was a way of life. He smoked publicly, proudly, and unapologetically, even lighting up on stage during concerts. In 1978, Tosh signed with Rolling Stones Records. His album Bush Doctor featured legends like Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. The duet Don't Look Back with Jagger became a hit, introducing Tosh's message to a global audience. But it was at the One Love Peace concert that same year where he truly made headlines, not just for his music, but for his defiance. Standing in front of a roaring crowd in Jamaica, Peter Tosh lit a massive spliff right on stage, then launched into a fiery speech condemning politicians Michael Manley and Edward Seaga for their failure to legalize cannabis. The crowd erupted, but the establishment wasn't cheering. Just months later, in September 1978, Tosh was arrested at Halfway Tree Square in Kingston for smoking weed. What followed was brutal. He was beaten in custody, his hand broken, his head split open, requiring stitches. But even bloodied and bruised, Peter Tosh never backed down. He once said, "Ganja has everything to do with the upliftment of the mind.
What am I without herb?
And what is herb without me?" Those weren't just words, they were his truth.
And he lived it, no matter the cost. Ninja Man.
Ninja Man, also known as Don Gorgon, was a force of nature in Jamaica's dancehall scene. With lightning-fast lyrics, a larger-than-life stage presence, and a reputation for hardcore rhymes, he quickly became one of the most controversial and talked-about figures in the genre. His breakthrough came in 1987 with the explosive hit Protection, a duet with Courtney Melody, setting the stage for a wild ride through the world of dancehall. He went on to work with some of Jamaica's most iconic producers, King Jammy, Lloyd Dennis, Philip Fatus Burrell, Bobby Digital, Gussie Clarke and more, churning out a string of gritty anthems like Murder Dem, Permit to Bury, Border Clash, and Above the Law. Between 1989 and 1992, Ninja Man carved out his legacy as one of dancehall's fiercest warriors. His raw, aggressive style electrified fans but also sparked concern. By the early 90s, critics accused him of promoting violence and glorifying gun culture. The backlash was swift. As public pressure mounted, his career began to falter. Performances dried up, studio time grew scarce, and the momentum that once made him unstoppable seemed to vanish. By 1997, Ninja Man made a radical turn. He rebranded himself as Brother Desmond, embraced gospel reggae, and began a journey of personal redemption. For over a decade, he had battled a crippling crack addiction, one that quietly tore apart his career and nearly destroyed him. "It was a serious problem," he admitted. "I spent 10 years smoking, and I saw what it was doing to people, so I stopped." Quitting wasn't just about saving his life, it was about reclaiming his purpose. And from the moment he let go of the drugs, Ninja Man felt something powerful return: control. Control of his voice, his message, and most importantly, his future.
Clive Hunt.
Clive Hunt is a Jamaican reggae legend, a gifted musician, producer, and composer whose talent knows no bounds. His journey began humbly at Stony Hill Approved School, where he first picked up the trumpet. By 17, he was already playing with the 1st Battalion Jamaica Regiment Band. But Clive was never just a trumpet player, he became a true multi-instrumentalist, mastering the bass guitar, flute, keyboards, horns, and saxophone. His versatility made him one of the most in-demand session players on the island. Yet Clive's talents didn't stop at performance. He also emerged as a brilliant arranger and producer, shaping the sound of reggae with his keen ear. In 1976, under the alias Lizard, he dropped his debut album Sata I, followed by Orthodox Dub on the iconic Wackies label, cementing his place in reggae history. In the late 1970s, Clive moved to New York City, collaborating with industry giants like Joe Gibbs and Lloyd Barnes. But amid the fast-paced world of international music, Clive fell into a dangerous trap. Surrounded by fame and temptation, he began using drugs, a habit that spiraled out of control. In 1987, his world came crashing down when he was arrested and deported back to Jamaica for drug-related offenses. It wasn't until 1991 that Clive made the decision that would save his life. He checked into rehab. Reflecting on that dark chapter, he once shared, "I got involved in it because everyone around me was doing it. I was rubbing shoulders with the biggest names, and one day, a friend offered it to me. For 11 years, I went from the highest high to the lowest low."
But Clive Hunt didn't stay down.
After beating his addiction, he rose again, this time with a clearer vision and a deeper purpose. He reclaimed his role as one of Jamaica's most respected producers, proving that even after the darkest storms, a true artist can still shine.
Jawara McIntosh.
Jawara McIntosh, better known as Tosh One, was born into reggae royalty as the son of the legendary Peter Tosh. From a young age, he was immersed in the rhythms and messages that shaped his father's legacy. Drawing inspiration not only from Peter Tosh, but also from icons like Bob Marley and his own uncle Bunny Wailer. Determined to carry the torch, Tosh One made his musical debut by reimagining his father's powerful anthem, "You Can't Blame the Youth." He quickly earned his place on stage alongside reggae's biggest stars, sharing the spotlight with Sizzla, Gregory Isaacs, Shabba Ranks, and Damian Marley. Backed by the legendary duo Sly and Robbie, he electrified crowds and later joined tours with heavyweight dub champion and collaborated with Daniel Brown, son of reggae icon Dennis Brown. But just as his star was rising, tragedy struck. On June 15, 2013, in Mahwah, New Jersey, police pulled him over for allegedly reckless driving. They claimed to find open alcohol containers in the car, and his license had already been suspended. A search of the vehicle revealed 3 large bags in the trunk, containing 65 pounds of marijuana. The arrest led to multiple charges, including possession and several driving offenses. After spending over 6 months in county jail, Tosh 1 pleaded guilty in 2016 and began a 1-year sentence in January 2017. But during his time at Bergen County Jail, the unthinkable happened. A violent altercation with another inmate left him with a devastating brain injury. Tosh 1 fell into a coma, one that lasted an entire year. When he finally awoke, the damage was irreversible. The man who once echoed the spirit of a musical legend could no longer speak his truth through song. His body survived, but his voice, the one meant to carry his father's legacy, was tragically silenced.
Baby Wayne.
Baby Wayne was more than just a dancehall artist. He was a voice of conscience in a genre often dominated by raw and explicit lyrics. At a time when many were chasing shock value, Baby Wayne chose a different path, using his music to warn young listeners about the harsh realities and dangers of crime. His breakthrough came in 1991 with the hit single Mama, a powerful collaboration with producers Steely and Clevie that put his thoughtful style in the spotlight. Songs like Road Me Come and Way D Man Def further cemented his reputation as a socially aware artist. In 1993, he joined forces with reggae veteran Leroy Smart to record Me Know Me Friend, produced by Winston Niney Holness, a track that soared into Jamaica's top 10. This success led to a deal with Heartbeat Records and the release of his debut album Ram DJ in 1994, which featured legends like Sugar Minott and Dennis Brown. Although Baby Wayne initially focused on positive, message-driven music, the pressures of the industry eventually drew him toward the more explicit style that was gaining mainstream traction. Tragically, his life was cut short on October 28, 2005, when he passed away from pneumonia complications at Kingston Public Hospital. Years later, dancehall icon Ninja Man reflected on their era, revealing that many artists, including Baby Wayne, struggled silently with addiction. "It's something that's addictive," Ninja Man said. "And it was made to destroy the black man." Behind the beats and rhymes was a haunting truth. Fame couldn't shield them from the demons they faced. Ziggy Marley. Ziggy Marley, the son of reggae legends Bob and Rita Marley, was born into music. From an early age, it surrounded him like air, inevitable and essential. He rose to fame leading the family band, Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers, releasing 8 studio albums before they disbanded in 2002. Afterward, Ziggy carved out a successful solo career, staying true to his roots by releasing all his music through his own label, Tough Gong Worldwide, just like his father did. Over the years, he's racked up 8 Grammy Awards and even a Daytime Emmy. But like his father, Ziggy also grew up in a culture where marijuana wasn't just recreational, it was spiritual. He first smoked weed at just 9 years old, with his father's blessing. At the time, it felt normal in their Rastafarian community, where cannabis was considered a sacred tool for reflection and connection. Looking back now, Ziggy admits he was far too young. In his own words, "I wouldn't have let myself do it if I were in my father's place." What do you think? Should legends be held accountable for how they raised their kids, even when culture was involved? And which reggae artist do you believe had their career completely derailed by substance abuse? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of music history.